Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Heavy Pen Podcast. Full disclosure, I have been recording for the last, 10, 20 minutes, and then I had to step away for a second, came back, listened to the audio just to make sure everything was cool, and I realized that my microphone wasn't set to the right thing. So the audio quality was really bad, and I was very upset because I thought that had been a pretty great intro, honestly. I was very proud of how the last one went. And yeah, now it's gone forever because the audio quality was bad. So I destroyed it, and you will never see it again. You can only imagine how perfect the intro was. And honestly, I feel bad for you guys because it was a great intro. Honestly, I don't even know if I'll ever be able to do an intro as good as that again. Huh? Yeah, I guess I peaked in episode 3 and no one was there to see it. But, if you peak and no one's around to hear, did you ever really peak? Hello, everybody. Once again, I am your host, Christian, sitting alone in a room, talking to you about storytelling, why it's cool, and why we need to approach it with a measure of responsibility. I'm so sorry I just jump scared you with speaking vaguely British. I will never do that again. I probably will do that again. It's a fun little quirk that I have. What are we talking about today? I'm glad you asked that. Today we are talking about themes. We are talking about themes in storytelling and how to kind of approach them, how readers are affected by them, why we need to be mindful of our themes. So, I'm sorry, my train of thought just completely exploded. Once again, kind of similar to how last episode we were talking about kind of the science of how stories affect you. A lot of the information that we'll go over in the beginning of this episode will be stuff that you probably on some level kind of just know instinctively. And there's a lot of that, a lot of instinctual understanding, especially if you are someone who has been engaging with I was about to say if you're someone who's been engaging with storytelling a lot, you definitely know this. And then I was like, wait, that's everyone. That's everyone who's ever existed in the country ever. You have never heard a story in your life. It's just not how that works. But I'm getting off topic. What I was saying, now that I've kind of had a second to catch my breath, you have an kind of sort of implicit instinctual understanding of the effects of themes on people, just because you've either experienced this. Well, no, you have experienced this. You've seen it happen, and you're just generally aware. But it's always good to kind of remind ourselves of our instincts, remind ourselves why those instincts are there, and kind of reinforce them with the knowledge of, the knowledge of what put them there. I just feel my foot getting closer and closer to my mouth. So we're going to move on before I keep tripping. So let's define themes real quick. The definition of themes that we are going to be using for today's episode, I've written down so that I don't have to think about it off the top of my head. Here it is. Themes are the ideas, lessons, and messages that color the stories we tell. They are the thing hiding between the lines, the subtext behind our characters' actions, the moral of our stories. An example of a theme is, don't tell needless lies, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Another example that I pulled a second ago in the Lost recording, I mentioned how Dune has so many themes. So many themes. That's probably something we'll touch on here, but there are. I feel the vast majority of stories that are kind of crafted, especially nowadays, will have more than one theme. They'll all have a central theme or something, but there will always be kind of secondary themes cropping up around things. Not so much in the super old, not even old. Not old. Old is wrong. The super low scale stuff fairy tales, things specifically aimed at very young children, those will probably all circle around one thing. If you're reading Aesop's Fables, you're probably not going to get much out of kind of character analyzing the rabbit in Tortoise and the Hare. But, as you kind of age up through stories, you'll start seeing things with more themes kind of swirling around each other. A lot of the times, complex themes are just themes that are mixed with other themes. So that's always cool. But yeah, so that's the definition of themes that we're using. So why do themes matter? What's the big deal about them? Why am I holding you hostage and talking to you about themes? Well, that's another kind of pretty straightforward answer, something that's pretty instinctual. But like the themes that we put in our stories, when we write stories, rather, we are kind of making a statement about the world. Aesop's fables, each of those is making a statement about like, this is the morally correct way to conduct yourself. Like, this is a way to do things. Stuff like Dune. Dune makes a lot of statements about a lot of things. Talks about like the dangers of like messianic figures, the effects of like, I was about to say colonialism, and I do think that's true, but I want to I'm gonna put a grain of salt in there, because it's been a minute since I watched it. But like it does definitely have colonial themes in there. There's so much. I really liked the Dune movies, and I was talking to someone about them a couple days ago, so it's kind of got me distracted. So I'm gonna do my best to not talk about the Dune movies as we go through this. But yeah, so why themes matter? Because it is us making a statement about the world, which, okay, cool. Yeah, people make statements about the world all the time. Why does it matter in, songs, books, movies, and all of that? Well, like we mentioned in the episode before, when people are consuming these narratives, our brains are processing them, internalizing them at a way higher rate than if we just were like kind of exposed to it generally. Okay, maybe not way, but a little bit deeper. Like if you just hear someone passing on the street say, "Man, I hate I don't even know. I don't know where I was going with this. Man, I hate this thing." We'll just, generic this thing, pending, working title. That's, something that you hear. Maybe you hear him make like a point that you agree with, and you're like, he makes a kind of valid point. That thing is annoying. But that is communicated way, way differently and way more on like an internal level if you come across that idea like this thing is bad through some sort of narrative. The better the narrative is at immersing you into itself, the better you kind of internalize whatever message this narrative has. That's why there are a lot of people who get very, very passionate about like ideas and messages in certain pieces of media, because like, not to give the vocal minority credit, but there is a little bit of validity to the like, hey, we have to be careful about what we say in things because these ideas spread very, very easily when they're in the form of like some form, any sort of media, or not media, any sort of like narrative that people are consuming. Kind of not lost the plot. I've been saying exactly what I wanted to say, but we're kind of getting off the beaten path a little bit. So let's bring it back. Why do themes matter? What's the big deal? Because when we make a statement about the world through the things that we create and people consume them, those ideas are getting internalized in a way more, I don't know what word to use. It's not efficient. It's not just deep. They're getting internalized. There. We'll leave it at that. They're getting internalized more than you might think. So it's important that you are aware of the fact that when you engage in all of this stuff, the stuff you're throwing out there is hitting and entering people. Now, quick kind of, not caveat, but quick like aside. A lot of the times when we're engaging, like when we're just making things for the sake of making things, we won't always think about like, what themes does this have? Like we won't go out with like a message we're trying to convey. Sometimes you just write a story or make a song or do a painting for the love of the game. That's incredibly valid and, fair. I actually do this a lot. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I do a lot of writing. I don't normally, at the beginning of a writing project, think to myself, oh, I want to say like, I want to make this statement with this work. But as I'm working, sometimes those themes will kind of emerge and I'll like go back through and like kind of even it back in. And I feel like that's the case for a lot of us. I don't want to say most of, we who make things. But I definitely think it's at least a lot of people will just make something and then later they'll think about the fact that like, oh, hey, there's like this really pervading theme of like justice in this thing that I made. Let me go back and kind of spread that out a little more evenly, make it a little stronger and all of that. I do not think that like if you're not going out with the purpose of putting some kind of message or theme in a work, I don't think that you're doing anything wrong. I would say I think like those things will just kind of naturally crop up as you're making them, regardless of what medium you're using. So be aware that that's something that's probably happening, but like don't let it bog you down. Once again, this podcast is not here to instill the fear of what you do into you. It is to simply make you more aware of all the aspects of what you do and give you the tools that you need to like, treat that responsibility with the care that you need to, but only the care that you need to. Do not make it over solemn. If you just want to write a song about Cheez-Its, write a song about Cheez-Its, but be aware that in the process of writing that song, you might accidentally make like an environmentalist piece. That's probably not going to happen in the specific thing that I just outlined, but that's what I'm talking about. Stories can exist for the pure sake of entertainment, but more likely than not, whatever you're doing will end up with some sort of themes. So be aware of that, be on the lookout for that, and treat that with the proper care because they matter. The statements we make about the world, people will hear, and that's important. So how do themes affect consumers? I realized that I wrote readers into the outline, and I'm very upset because once again, more general, not just readers, but consumers. How do themes affect the people who consume those themes? Well, when we make these statements about the world, like I said a second ago, we say them into people. We aren't simply just kind of casting out into the void. If we are sending out a message of love, that hits people not on the outside of themselves, but on the inside. Same thing if we're doing it with hate and all of that. These things have a certain amount of power. They will sometimes just stick with people. I know that you can probably think of a couple examples of like something that you consumed which like really lingered with you. Maybe you didn't really know why, maybe you do. I'm actually going to talk about one of mine towards the end when we get into the examples portion. But yeah, like themes and messages, all of that stuff, they go into people, they stick with them. So it's really important that we're aware of that fact, because if we're not mindful about the sorts of things that we're sending out, we could be causing a lot of unnecessary and unintentional harm. And so there's another side to what I just said about like the unnecessary and unintentional harm. Just being aware that themes can do harm isn't going to prevent them from doing harm. Like just because you know, hey, I have to be mindful writing this story which features some sort of familial abuse, just because you know that that could hurt someone, that it's not going to stop it from hurting someone. This is mostly just like a be aware and do it on purpose almost, which sounds really bad. But you shouldn't not touch certain themes just because they have the potential to do harm. The point, the reason that I'm trying to like make you aware of the fact that this is possible is because if you're going to, broach subjects, if you're going to have themes, if you're going to do all this stuff, you need to do it on purpose. If you cause harm, that harm has to have some kind of grander purpose. It cannot just be, oh, well, I didn't really think about the fact that, my main characters struggle with, dissociative identity disorder. I didn't know that my main character struggling with that would negatively affect people who either know people who struggle with that or people who do struggle with that. It's not enough to say sorry. You have to be aware of the fact that you're doing these things so that if something does happen, it wasn't an accident. And that's kind of like that's a little bit of a downer note. It's like, yeah, you can't really avoid doing harm. You obviously can't avoid doing harm. But like when you're touching on heavier subjects, sometimes it will not always have a positive effect that you wanted. So you don't want that to be an accident. Like you don't want to accidentally have a okay, I'm going to use a really bad analogy, but I think this kind of paints the picture. So think of like a razor blade, like a thing that you would use to shave your face or your legs or whatever. There is a safety razor, which can cut people, and then there are just loose blades, which will cut people. In this analogy, not being aware of your themes is, having a bag with just a bunch of loose blades in it, no safety case. If you just kind of pass that bag around, someone's going to get cut. And that's on you. You weren't thinking about the fact that these loose razor blades could cut someone. You just assumed, it's whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's just a bag. And then someone got cut because you weren't being safe. On the other hand, if you pass around a bag of safety razors, someone still might get cut. It's very highly likely because they're blades. But you were aware of the fact that was a thing that could happen. So you put them in the safety razor thing. That's the same kind of thing that I want you to do, or want us to do, because I am including myself in this, that I want to do when we're approaching kind of the use of themes. Because not all themes are light. A lot of themes have the potential to cause harm, bring up negative memories and all of that. So I would rather, when that happens, it be kind of an intentional decision that we made, that we took the steps to do with as much care as we could, as opposed to just, I thought it would be neat to have my main character have this mental disorder because it just seemed like a cool idea. Being completely ignorant of the fact that, like, hey, portraying mental illness as a source of evil has caused a lot of bad things. I did not mean to bring up Split. I haven't brought up Split, but I have been thinking about it. I haven't actually seen that movie. I just know that the main villain in that movie has DID. Hold on, let me pull up. Yeah. Violent kidnapper with dissociative identity disorder. Not an accurate portrayal of people living with the illness. Yeah. And that's like a thing that I think is like pretty... Well, I actually don't know that it's pretty well known. Since we're kind of already here, I'm just going to lean all into it. Let's say we're starting the examples now with Split. So, Split. Thriller action movie, maybe thriller mystery, where the main villain has DID, and like that's the plot. It's like he kidnaps these girls, and like one of his personalities is like evil or something. That's not how dissociative identity works, and portraying it like that creates this negative image in people's heads that kind of pervades outside of the movie. Now, I'm not saying that Split is responsible for the perception of DID that we have as a society. However, we as a society do have a really pervasive stigma against some of these more dramatic, not even dramatic, just like these more well-known, more widely known mental disorders like DID. Another example of like a mental disorder that we have a really bad kind of public perception of is I'm going to say psychopathy. I don't actually think that's the name. I'm going to see if I can find the name, but basically the condition where you have no empathy, the thing, basically being a psychopath. Now, when you hear the word psychopath, you think violent, evil, monster. You think of slasher villains. You think of all these things. However, that just means you do not have like an empathy, or it's, I don't know if it's that you do not have, or if it's like significantly lowered, but like you don't really empathize. Like that's the main gist of it. There are so many people who have this disorder who are just normal people. They might even be nice. They probably are very nice because it's not it's not a moral thing. Like, you're not more likely to be evil if you have this disorder. But that's not how we portray it in our stories and all of that. A lot of the times we will just be like, oh, he's a psychopath, he's going to kill us, or whatever, without any real understanding of like what those words mean. Same thing with dissociative identity disorder, and going back to talking about Split, portraying these things as evil, portraying these things as evil brings with that the theme, the message of these disorders make people more dangerous, which is not necessarily true and is very harmful to these people, because like it makes it harder to talk about your disorders, because like, oh, if I have dissociative identity disorder, I don't now want to talk to people about it, because they'll be like, oh, so like you'll just like randomly change personalities, and like, are you violent? Like, are you dangerous? Should I be worried? Which is like, imagine, like, put yourself in the shoes of like the person who has to do that. Like, that sounds awful. And you don't want to contribute to kind of creating this air of like not being able to talk about, aspects of yourself, because people think of it as like being some sort of like negative, dark part of yourself. And full disclosure, I'm not an authority on any of these disorders. I've not done a ton of research on them. I have done some just for various projects and things, and like I've worked with people who were studying them. I've not ever met a person who had dissociative identity disorder, or who had whatever the disorder is called, where you do not have empathy to the same levels as most people. But I am aware of like these effects, because that's the thing that I had to study, like the effects of the narratives we create, and the worlds and the effects of the narratives we create, and how that affects society and those people who are kind of the subjects of the narratives we create. So that was Split. We kind of brought up a bonus negative example. Let's talk about a positive example of a good execution of themes and kind of aspects of a character. Split might have been a little bit of a side tangent, because that's more of like an aspect of a character and a portrayal of mental illness. But there are like the themes of like, oh, mental illness equals this, which are not good. They are bad. And that's the thing that we should try to not do, or at the very least not do on accident. I am not, let me be very clear. I am not saying to portray mental illness as like this thing which makes people more dangerous on purpose. Or I'm not saying to do that. I am saying if you're going to do it, don't hide behind the, oh, it was an accident, oh, I didn't really think about it. We are very, very far past the point where like that's okay. We live in the age of information. If you're going to have something in your story, you need to study it. You need to be aware of how you're using it so that you can do it well. And if that just means that like your original idea doesn't work, then your original idea doesn't work. You should not break reality in a bad way if you don't have to. Why do I say all of that after I just said we were moving to a different example? Because we're going to talk about an example of kind of covering these kind of mental illness themes from a good way. We are going to talk about the author Brandon Sanderson, his fantasy epic, The Stormlight Archives, and one of my favorite characters, Kaladin Stormblessed. There will be no spoilers if you are concerned about that. I do highly recommend that you go and read these, because they're awesome. And Kaladin specifically, if you're into like portrayals of mental illnesses, but done well, is a super good one. So our main character, or one of many main characters of the Stormlight Archive, Kaladin, he struggles with depression. It was actually, I wish I had the interview or the article where Brandon was talking about like how he went about creating Kaladin. But it's very, very, very cool. One of the core ideas, or one of the ideas behind Kaladin, was to take a character who suffered from depression, and not like his depression at points gets really, really bad. But the point of Kaladin was to take that thing which is typically portrayed as like a almost debilitating weakness. Like, you know, you kind of have that in your head. If you've struggled with it, if you know someone who struggled with it, if you've just heard the discourse surrounding depression, we talk about it like it's this thing which consumes you with no hope of anything. Kaladin was an attempt by Brandon Sanderson, and I would say a very successful attempt by Brandon Sanderson, to take a character with this problem and make them heroic. Like, make it an aspect of themselves that they overcome. And, well, okay, not overcome. Like, he doesn't beat his depression. Like, he doesn't just, you know, learn the lesson about himself and then he's never depressed again. He struggles with it throughout the entirety of the story. But it's so cool watching him be this hero who has this, like, as someone who does not struggle with like the ongoing issue. I've had points in my life where I was severely depressed. So like I had that little bit of a window to kind of look into Kaladin's head, understand what it was talking about. And through that window, I learned a lot about depression. Like, I learned a lot about how people who have that have to deal with it. And like, it kind of sent me on a journey of understanding this thing better. Just kind of making me more aware of stuff. And like the underlying message that, you know, just because you have this doesn't mean that it is all you are, is a really, really incredible thing that I don't actually know many people have done, that Brandon Sanderson has done with this character. And like, hey, there are people who have read this story and have been positively impacted by that theme. The theme of like, hey, you can still be a hero even if you know, have this weakness, or like you have this thing. That's what heroes are typically supposed to do. Like, show us, the readers, that we can become more than ourselves. And Kaladin does great. I'm gonna cut myself off there, talking about how Kaladin is such a cool example of this. I think I left a couple kind of threads dangling. We'll definitely do like a deep dive into the Stormlight Archive or a couple of the characters from it in the future, because it's awesome and I really love talking about it. But in the meantime, just go read the first book. The first book is phenomenal and will also basically tell you if you want to read the rest of it or not. They're long, yeah, but you want a book that'll last you for a while. Don't worry about it. Just read it. Read it, listen to it. I don't care. Oh my gosh, the narrators are great. I'm getting way off track. So let's get to our next example, which is the one I mentioned earlier about a story with themes that has stuck with me forever. All right, let's jump into that before I start talking more about the Stormlight Archives. So, what is our final example that has gotten the greatest long intro of all time of, yeah, this stuck with me forever? Well, we're going to talk about the Lunar Chronicles, by Marissa Meyer, a great, genuinely very, very good retelling of a bunch of fairy tales. Specifically, it is Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, Rapunzel, and Snow White. Those are the four. But we're not talking about any of the four main books. We're talking about book 3.5, Fairest, which tells the backstory of the series' primary antagonists. I will also steer clear of spoilers here, because if you haven't read this, highly recommend. It's very, very good. But Fairest has the primary antagonist backstory. What was the theme of this book that stuck with me forever? Why am I still talking about it? Was it done well or poorly? Well, I would say, kind of answering the last question first, I think it handled its themes pretty well. I think everything in there was done very intentionally. And, you know, very well explored, very well developed. Also, it messed me up. It completely kind of not twisted me. It became like a little ball in my chest that, just kind of slowly unraveled over the years of like, man, reading, I did the audiobook, like listening to that book was an experience, and it was hard. It was tough. It was very, very sad. I will say, full disclosure, I was in 8th grade when I went through this the first time, way below the the intended age range for these books. Maybe not way below, because I hate how the industry defines things, because apparently young adult means teenager, which we're not going to get into right now, but oh boy, would I love to be mad about these stupid industry terms. Anyway, Fairest. So the theme of Fairest, which really hurt me and kind of like made me think about the world very differently, was kind of this theme of the death of innocence. So the primary antagonist of the series, I don't really know if it's a spoiler to say who it is. It kind of isn't. We'll just say. So the primary antagonist of the series is the Evil Queen. It's not like secret. Evil Queen meaning from Snow White, because like that's the character archetype she's based off of. So we get to see in Fairest her backstory, how she became who she is. I read this in 8th grade, so I was like 11, 12, I forget specific. Not 8th grade, no, younger, maybe 7th. Shoot, yeah, 7th grade or less. I read a lot as a kid. Well, it doesn't matter. It was very normal for me to have access to these kinds of books. My mother was very hesitant about letting me go through this one, because she was like, yeah, this one's like really tough, and I don't know if you'll be able to handle it. And I was like, no, I can handle it. And I could handle it. But she was also kind of right. It was a little much for me. But yeah, so this theme of the death of innocence, we get to see how the evil queen, Queen Levana, goes from this child who just wants to be loved to the person she is at the beginning of the story, which is this cruel, calculating figure who is desperately clinging on to these illusions of power that she has. And it's not a happy story at all. I don't know if it was the first book that I read that didn't have a happy ending, but it was definitely the first one that I read that like just was kind of depressing. It just hit me. Like I was in a funk for a long time after reading that book, and like it's still like just thinking about it like still makes me feel emotions. I don't know if you can really like tell, but like I'm still like, man, it was a tough book. And like it was about, primary thing for me at the time was like this theme of the death of innocence. Me as a mostly innocent child, read this book and I was like, wow, that's so sad that can happen to a person. And that's not, mind you, the first time I had been confronted with the concept of bad things happen to people and can twist them. However, the story was significantly better at impressing that kind of lesson on me of like, very, very, very few people are born evil, and becoming that is not something that happens easily. It was an experience having that kind of imprinted on me through this book. And it was an experience that like every history lesson and all of that could not do. And like that's why we're talking about this episode. We're talking about like themes and how they affect people. Like it's been upwards of it's been a long time since I read that book. Almost at least 12 years, I think, since I read that book. That number might be wrong. It might be a little bit less, but in that range. And like, here we are. I haven't listened to it more than once. I've listened to this book once, 11, 12 years ago. And like, it still is on me. Like, it still affects me. It still makes me feel emotions to this day, even so far removed. And like, that's why these things are important. That's why we want to be mindful of the themes that we kind of put forward. Yeah, so that was my last example. So let's kind of recap and talk about like what we can do. So what did we do this episode? What were we talking about? Talking about how themes, messages, and all of that stuff that we put into the stories we make, stories we tell. Talking about how they're important, how they affect people because they're in this medium of storytelling, which is really, really good at kind of bringing information to the heart level. And the statements that we're making about the world through our stories are really important because of that. So we don't want to do anything by accident because we could accidentally do some real harm, whether that just be contributing to a societal thing like with mental illness or just hitting people with stuff that will stick with them for way longer than we expect, like with me and Ferris. And I'm 100% certain other people and Ferris have had similar kind of relationships. So what does this mean for you, the fledgling creator? Or maybe not fledgling, just the creator in general. Well, kind of just what I said a second ago. It's about being mindful. This is another reason that I said, like, it's very, very broad, because we're not covering, like, okay, here's how to do mental illness well. We're not talking about how to do, like, the descent into evil well. We're just talking about themes and the fact that you need to be mindful of them. It's literally just kind of that. When you are making stuff that you intend for other people to consume, it is very important for you to be aware of what you're putting in them and be doing that intentionally. That does not mean that you should only ever write Aesop's fables. It does not mean that you should only ever do stuff that's like super light and fluffy, or even on the other side, and you only confront like the horrors of the world and all of that. No, that's not what that means. What it does mean is that you have to know what you're putting into the stuff that you create. Be aware of that. Make sure that you are doing it on purpose. See what the potential implications of what you make are. And after you've done all of that, after you've done your due diligence, if you're confident that, you know, this is what you want, you're doing it with a purpose and, you know, on purpose, then go for it. Tell whatever story you want to tell. Just tell it intentionally. Because that's really the bare minimum. You've got to be aware of what you're doing and do it on purpose. So, with all that said, that this is the end of the episode. Thank you once again for coming back. You came back for round 3. I hope I've been doing a good job so far. And you can tell me whatever you want by going to any of the socials linked below. I was very excited to get to this episode because this is where kind of like I get to just lean into, all right, I just know this stuff and I can just start talking about it without having to have 27 articles up in front of me. I really enjoyed doing the research for episode 2, but just kind of getting to sit down with something that I know without having to have reference stuff off to the side was also very nice. If you've gotten this far through the show, and you haven't done like the... Am I doing that? No, we're not doing that. You know what I was going to say. If you want to, go for it. If you don't, I will still be here in the next episode. I am still going to be making this for as long as I really can, because I enjoy this subject and just kind of getting to yap. So, yeah. Thanks for listening this far. I hope to see you in the next episode. Man, I say the same thing to outro everything that I do, and yet it's still just, man, do I forget it every time. All right, cool. I remember it now. So thank you all so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, or whatever time it is, wherever you are. And I will see you in episode 4. All right. Bye-bye.